Friends, thank you for being here today and just the gift and the grace to experience Michael's baptism today. We're so grateful for him, and we're grateful for you that we can have a community where people can find faith in Christ, can grow, and can make that commitment. And I just want to extend the invitation, as I always do when we have a baptism, that you have never been baptized before. If you have a child that you would like to be baptized, that invitation is open. And I'd love to have that conversation with you and invite you into this community as part of baptism. And so just want to extend that invitation to each and every one of you if you've never been baptized before. Just connect with me, and again, would love to have that conversation. We're in a series right now called I Hope This Finds You Well. We're going through the letter of James. So we're in the third week, so if you're following the reading plan, it's a 5-week series. There's 5 chapters. We're in chapter 3, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. And today we're talking about one section, verses 13 through 18, about wisdom, what it means to be wise. I want to invite you to check in. Let us know that you're here today. You can give us your email address. You can get you on the email list, and we can welcome you, invite you into this community, and also you can find out everything that's going on in the life of Branches. So especially if it's one of your first times here, please check in. You can scan this QR code, or there's a card in front of you. You can scan that card and let us know that you were here today. We want to welcome you as our guest. What is the difference between wisdom and knowledge? When you say someone maybe knows a lot and someone is wise, they may cross over, but you're making a distinction. You're describing two very different things. You may know someone who knows a lot but isn't very wise. They're like a degree collector and they are always in college, it seems like, but they're not very wise. Or maybe someone who's really wise and who is quote unquote uneducated. Maybe that person is coming to mind for you right now. We know it without saying it explicitly, the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Information versus transformation, we say here at Branches all the time. Input versus embodied way of being. My Old Testament professor in seminary said to be wise would be to be an expert liver. An expert at life, not like your organ. An expert liver. An expert liver, like in that way, is another thing. But to be an expert liver, somebody that knows how to live a good life. And that's different from knowing a lot. No one likes a know-it-all, but everybody loves a wise person. You want to be around them. You want to spend time with them. You want to learn from them, not just the information, but to see how they live their life. We say again, wisdom versus knowledge is wisdom is caught and knowledge is taught. We want to catch a wise life. We want to look at somebody a little further down the road than we are and see how they live their life and learn from them. If you want to be wiser in your marriage, you look at people a little further down the road in their marriage. If you want to be wiser at your job, you look at somebody who's had the job longer than you and see what they do. If you want to be a wise parent, you watch a parent who's knocking it out of the park and doing a great job, at least by the appearance that you see. Wisdom and knowledge is different. I heard this story this week that in the British military in World War II, there was this sign posted outside of where they stored the warheads, where they stored the bombs. And on it, it said something to this effect. It is important that we store the warheads with the tops on the bottom, so upside down, with the tops on the bottom. And it's so important that we store the tops on the bottom and the bottoms on the tops that we have now actually labeled the bottoms top. Knowledge and wisdom are different. Truly, to know which is the top and which is the bottom, if you label something the top, that's the top and not the bottom. Heard it put another way this week. Brandon Sanderson, I mentioned him a lot recently. You're going to get tired of it. Famous fantasy author, teaches this class at BYU every year about writing. And he tells his writing students, I want you to move from being a cook to being a chef. We make that distinction too. There's a difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom. A cook looks at the instructions. Finally, one of those TikToks that you saved, you're going to look it up and actually make it and not just like gawk over it on your phone. And you go line by line, you measure out all the ingredients, you do all the prep, you cut up everything, and you follow step by step the right temperature for the right time, in the right place, the right spices. And there's no worse feeling in the world. I'm the cook in my house. I should say I'm the chef in my house. Very wise. To get that result, to follow it line by line, and it doesn't look right, it doesn't taste right, it's not what you expected, it's not what you wanted. Brandon Sanderson says, a chef knows what happened. A cook can go line by line. A chef can say like, oh, it was in the oven for too long. Or, oh, the temperature was wrong. Or I used this type of spice and not this type of spice. Or I know the difference between baking soda and baking powder or whatever else. A chef knows that difference. A cook follows instructions. Landon and I got a Dutch oven for our wedding almost 10 years ago. And it was from Williams-Sonoma, and it came with this little hardback cookbook in it. And in that cookbook, it had a recipe for chili. And we tried it one time, like right after we'd been married, and we really, really liked it. Like, every time it's cold, we're going to make this. And then after a while, I started to make it, and people were like, oh, this is so good. How do you make it? And I'm like, I don't know if I could write it down. I just kind of go in the kitchen and do it. You know, I get all the stuff, and I kind of mess around with it every time. But it's because I went from being a cook, thank you, Williams-Sonoma, to being a chef. And I could probably walk you through it. I could probably talk you through it, but it's not the same every time. And I could tell you why it turned out not quite right or why it tasted different. The difference between a cook and a chef. That's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Again, you probably know a person who knows a lot but isn't very wise, who's full of information, the fun fact person, but isn't living a very wise life. Likewise, you may know someone who's the wisest person in the world. You want to be around them all the time and gather their life into your own life, but they don't know very much. They're not very knowledgeable. And we can value both. I think knowledge is really important. I think, of course, wisdom is really important, but we can see the distinction. Tom at St. Luke's, he had a mentor tell him near the end of his life, certainly long after his ministry, he said he was worried that he had spent his entire career getting stuff out of his notebook into somebody else's notebook. That's knowledge, not wisdom. What we're seeking is wisdom. Can you think of a time in your own life, not to embarrass you, you can keep it to yourself, where you had all the facts, you knew all the information, you had all the knowledge you needed, and you messed up? You made an unwise choice. Something didn't pan out the way you wanted it to, and you wish you had done it differently. A time when you knew exactly what to do, but you did it wrong anyway. John Ortberg, famous Christian author, pastor, tells this really wonderful story about taking his family to one of those like family portrait places that don't really exist anymore. It was like back in the 90s, took his family, and he said it was the worst time of their lives because they had little kids. None of them wanted to be there. They'd spent all morning getting dressed, getting ready to go have their picture taken. That was a kind of an event in and of itself, getting them in the car, getting them to the mall, going to the photo studio. And he says, I went through several stages. The first stage was optimism. This is going to be awesome. This is going to be great. We're going to have these cute pictures. We're going to hang them up in the house. It's going to be fine. They're cranky now, but by the time we get there, it'll be fine. No. And then he says, I moved to the second stage, which was bribery. Kids, there's a Miss Fields right around the corner. If you're good for the picture, we'll all go get a cookie. Didn't work. Made it worse, actually, because all they could think about was Mrs. Fields' cookies. Third, he said, I moved to threatening, which is, kids, if you don't sit down and smile for the picture and act like you want to be here, I'll give you something to be upset about, the threat. And then he moved to a fourth new stage. His daughter had a baby doll named Tweezers. He says he doesn't know why she named the baby doll Tweezers, but he got down on her level and said, honey, I bet you want to see Tweezers now more than anything. You really wish you had your little baby Tweezers, right? And he said that she just like her bottom lip kind of came out quivering. She just started nodding. She really wanted Tweezers. And he says, if you don't sit down, you will never see Tweezers again. John Ortberg, I consider him a wise person, had all the facts, knew all the buttons, had all the information, knew that he could ransom Tweezers, knew that there was a Mrs. Fields around the corner, knew that they were going to get these pictures done. It would be a really great thing, that none of that mattered. Knowledge versus wisdom. James, just to put it succinctly, in the entire book, and all the passages actually we've covered so far, identifies faith that does something. James is not interested in people that just believe some stuff, but it doesn't change their life. James' concern in the entire letter is, you believe, the passage we read last week, he asked this rhetorical question, do you actually believe any of this stuff? Because if you did, you would behave this way. And that's where we come today. He kind of follows that passage and then says, This is what it means to be wise. This is what it means to put into practice all the things that Jesus taught us and all the things that I'm telling you and all the things that will make you live a good life. This is what it means to be wise. So we're in James chapter 3, starting in verse 13, and James says this. He asked this great question. Who is wise and understanding among you? Show by your good life that your works are done with gentleness born of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be boastful and false to the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, devilish. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there will also be disorder and wickedness of every kind. Here's where I want to zero in today, in verse 17. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. Friends, this is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. This is what wisdom looks like, James says. Here is Jesus' wisdom. Here is biblical wisdom, we might say. Here's the wisdom that's going to move the needle in your life. First, it's pure. Pure and purity has its own kind of baggage in our culture. What James means is it's single-minded. It has one focus. It's unmixed. It's not like, I'll take some Jesus wisdom over here, and this wisdom over here, and this wisdom over here. He says, first, it's pure. You got to be committed to it singly. It goes in one direction, not pulled in every which way, not compartmentalized, as our culture wants us to atomize the different parts of our mind and say, okay, I'll be like Jesus over here, but I'm not going to be like Jesus over here. It's pure. And that's what he says first. First in rank, first in order, first in importance. First, the wisdom is pure. It's one thing. Second, it's peaceable. Notice he doesn't say it's peaceful. It's a different word. Peaceable. It's not conflict loving. We say conflict avoidant. It doesn't embrace conflict well. It's not argumentative. And it doesn't make you a floor mat, but it's looking to make it work. A peaceable person says, okay, I know there's going to be some conflict here, but I'm looking to reconcile. It's in the spirit of Jesus, who came, Paul says, to have the ministry of reconciliation, to make things right, to make things one. It's peaceable, seeking to make it work. Third, wisdom is gentle. Mild is another translation. And mild, sometimes we use it to say like it's bland. But it's not bland, it's easy to be around. It's caught, not taught. You can think of a gentle person right now. Maybe you're here with them today. And they're gentle in spirit and manner, and you can't quite describe it succinctly. Just like easy to be around. Cozy. I think of Teddy Roosevelt, who was not a mild person by any means, but from all accounts was like cozy to be around. And he was also like a rad dude, like mustache, horse riding, like shooting guns, whatever else, kind of rad. But also cozy, was gentle. We named the teddy bear after him. Fourth, willing to yield. There's a variety of translations, however you're reading this in your own Bible. Willing to yield, I think, is really active and helpful. Another way I'd put it is it's teachable. This wisdom comes in ready to learn something about another. It listens. It's persuadable. I have not told the story to you before, and I thought about if I should or not, but I'm going to. I had a tutor in Oxford named Barry, who we all called Scary Barry. He's scary. And he was one of my poetry tutors. And my very first meeting with him, in tutorial situation, you would write a paper and then you'd go to your tutor and read the paper aloud to them, which is its own level of terrifying, and then add another layer that he was kind of an intimidating person. One time I saw him out on the street and I was like, Barry, and he like glared at me and then kept walking, like not gentle and cozy, not Teddy Roosevelt. So I went and he said, before you read your paper today, will you recite the poem? It was like a John Donne poem or something. I was like, yeah, sure. I start to reach in my bag to pull out the book. He's like, what are you reaching in your bag for? And I was like, oh, I was going to read you the poem. Isn't that what you wanted? He was like, no, recite it from memory. I was like, yikes. And I said, I don't know it by memory. And he said, how could you write a paper on a poem you don't know by memory? Scary Barry. But I was teachable, and you better believe then on, every weekly tutorial I had with Barry, that was the thing I focused more on, was memorizing the poem. Alistair Begg, I heard him say this week, a willing to yield person, a teachable person, it's the difference between knowing your own mind and having your mind made up. I think it's a really helpful distinction. You go into a conflict or a conversation or trying to learn something or grow or to make some decision at work or make some decision in your marriage or make some parenting decision. There's a difference between knowing your own mind, knowing your own opinion. This is helpful in our kind of ideological differences too. Knowing your own mind and having your mind made up. A wise person is willing to yield. That is willing to listen and learn and grow. That's counterintuitive, and it's actually counter how our brain chemistry works. We want to double down what we already believe. A wise person is willing to yield. A wise person is merciful. That's the next point. Unfairly merciful. I think, of course, of Reliant K. It says, the beauty of grace is that it makes life not fair. Mercy is saying, this is what fairness says, and this is what God says. That we get something that we don't quite deserve. It breaks what we desire. It kind of points back to last week. It undermines the sort of ranking system we've come up with in our world and say, I know this person really deserves my ire and my hatred and my conflict, but I'm going to be merciful. A wise person is merciful. A wise person bears good fruit. We should know this really well at Branches. At the heart of our community is to bear good fruit, to abide in Jesus so good fruit comes. Again, it's not cranking out some sort of cog and some sort of factory. Fruit comes because we've cultivated a good life. Peace, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, these come naturally to a wise person. Good stuff comes because we've intentionally cultivated a life where those things grow. And last, there is no partiality, there is no hypocrisy. We don't say one thing and do another, to put it succinctly. The great gift of the Christian faith that James is pointing to in this wisdom is that we don't have to try, but we can train. The opposite of grace isn't effort, it's earning. That we can train to become more like this wise person that he's describing. That's ultimately embodied in Jesus. So we say the difference between trying and training is that we day in, day out make a commitment to say, I want to be more wise. I'm going to spend my time around people who are more wise, who fit these qualities. And the good news is, if I can't find one, we have an exemplary trainer in Jesus. You ever go into a craft store or something, and you see the fake fruit for display, and you have this intrusive thought that you really want to bite into it, and it's not real, but there's some part of you who's like, what if there's putting real fruit out here? What if it's just like at Trader Joe's and they give the kids an orange or whatever, but it's fake fruit? If you're trained, if you're wise, you know the difference between in yourself and others, real versus fake fruit. I had a person I worked with. We were in a church situation where things were not going well. Just to be upfront, people were leaving. People were unhappy with the way things were going. I spent most of my time responding to frustrated emails. I spent most of my time putting out fires and not doing real good discipleship and ministry in the world. And this colleague of mine said, I don't know what's wrong. We're doing all the right things. And I think about that phrase often because I'm like, well, obviously not. That's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. That's the difference between knowing that there's a missed field, there's a way we can manipulate, there's a threat that we can give, there's a thing that we can do, we have the information versus what we should do in the moment. That's the difference between being a cook or a chef when it comes to our spiritual life. They're like, I know a lot about the Bible, I've read all of church history, I'm full of facts about Jesus, wonderful, but my life looks nothing like his. That's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And it's a hefty thing to put on, to say, what I'm working for is not to study more, though that's good, and what I'm working for is not to, again, memorize things, Barry, but to learn how to live a good, wise life. You can tell, unwise, I'm still carrying some of that around. I have a lot of work to do. Here's what I want you to do in this moment. put yourself at the top of that list. Put your name in the blank. I'll do it for myself. We'll do it a couple of times. And think instead of wisdom, it's your name. Colin is first pure and peaceable and gentle and willing to yield and merciful and bears good fruit. And in him there is no partiality or hypocrisy. I felt yucky saying all of that just now. Because part of me says like, well, yeah, not all the time, but sometimes I'm pure, and sometimes I'm peaceable, and sometimes I'm gentle, and sometimes I'm willing to yield, and sometimes I'm merciful, and sometimes I bear good fruit, and sometimes I'm not partial or hypocritical. I've asked this question a million times before. It's a helpful one. Put yourself at the top of that list and read it to someone who knows you really well, who you work with. Carrie. Colin is first pure and peaceable and gentle and willing to yield and merciful and bears good fruit and has no partiality or hypocrisy. She's shaking her head, see? But then think again of these same qualities of a wise person. You know someone in your life that fits these pretty well. And they're humble, so they're not going to readily admit it. Today, tomorrow, this week, call them and say, can we get coffee? Or can we get lunch? Or can I just spend some more time with you? Or can I hear more about your story? Or can you tell me a time when you really failed and tell me what happened on the other side of it? There's a person, you can think of them right now, who, yeah, the first thing about them is they have pure, one-minded dedication, and they're peaceable, and they're gentle, and they're willing to yield, and they're merciful, and they bear good fruit, and they're not partial, and they're not hypocrites. You know that person. Spend more time around them. That's a great gift of community, is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and we don't have to white-knuckle it to become this person. God has given us saints of people who do these very things, who live this very life. And the goal, again, is not to like beat ourselves up and be like, oh, geez, I'm not any of this stuff. What am I doing here? The good grace, again, is that in Jesus, we have the wise person. We have wisdom itself embodied. We have stories of a person who lived out counterintuitive wisdom by loving his enemies and showing mercy to those who showed him no mercy, and to giving grace and an invitation to all people, even people who would reject him. That's wisdom. So one day, maybe with a little more confidence, maybe with a little more transformation, maybe with a little less icky feeling when you read it, you can read this list and say, yeah, pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, merciful, I'm bearing good fruit, I'm not partial, and I'm not a hypocrite, by God's grace. Thanks be to God for that.